before we dive in, I need you to understand something. Craigslist isn't what it used to be. Back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, it was the Wild West of the internet. No verification. No background checks. Just strangers making deals with strangers. And sometimes, those strangers had plans that went far beyond buying furniture or renting a room. The 3 stories you're about to hear are real. They happen to real people who thought they were just trying to save money or find a good deal. The first involves a free housing arrangement that came with hidden cameras. The second is about a house cleaner who had a spare key and a very disturbing routine. And the third, well, let's just say it proves that some people use Craigslist to hunt for victims. If you've ever used Craigslist or responded to an online ad from a stranger, you'll want to hear these stories. And if you haven't, you'll understand why you should never start. Drop a comment if you've had a creepy Craigslist experience. Trust me, you're not alone. Story 1, free housing. I'll choose to be anonymous with this because it's pretty embarrassing. And also, putting my name out there tied to this story is probably a horrible idea for reasons that will become clear. There was a Craigslist ad posted in 2017 by a guy named Jackson. He was advertising free lodging for a girl who would watch over his house and clean. Basically an au pair or nanny position without having to watch any kids. I'll just be honest, I kind of lost the will to do a lot when I was 21. I had zero relationship with my parents or younger sister, and I only had a handful of friends I could actually trust. I dropped out of college my first year. That was part of the reason my parents hated me for a while. And I was working a dead-end job at a vape shop in a strip mall, making $9 an hour. I like to refer to this period as my apathy era. Nothing mattered. I was just going through the motions, living at my parents' house, listening to them fight downstairs every night. When I saw Jackson's Craigslist ad, it really caught my attention. It had maybe 10 pictures of his house. It looked like a modest middle-class house, slightly old-fashioned with wood paneling and floral wallpaper, but honestly I was into that vintage aesthetic. The pictures weren't what got my attention the most though. It was the fact that free living was offered for a nanny-type position. No rent. No utilities. Just clean the house and maybe cook sometimes. And here's the kicker, no background check required. I didn't even ask my family or friends their opinion on this post before I decided to reply to it. Like I said, I wasn't exactly talking to my parents or sister at the time anyway. I texted the number on the ad and this Jackson guy responded within a few minutes. I expressed interest in the listing and asked some basic questions about what he expected. He had an answer for everything, and honestly each answer made me feel more interested. But he asked pretty early on in the conversation what my gender was. When I said female, it almost seemed like his responses got longer. More detailed. More enthusiastic. I honestly didn't care. Most people prefer having a female housekeeper or nanny. That's just reality. Anyway, I was still interested. Anything that got me out of my parents' house sounded like freedom. He said he wouldn't be home most of the time during the day because he worked in pharmaceutical sales. He said he wanted to come home to a clean house, and he also wouldn't mind coming home to a cooked meal from time to time after work. Honestly, I was cool with that too. If it meant free housing, hell yeah, I'll cook some food. Beat standing behind the vape counter helping dudes pick out fruit-flavored nicotine. Plus, he said he'd pay for the groceries. It was sounding almost too good to be true. He suggested I come by later that day to check the place out and see if it was a good fit. I said okay. A few hours later, I was on my way in my crappy little Honda Civic to the guy's house. It was in a perfectly normal part of town. Older neighborhood, but well maintained. The block actually seemed pretty calm and peaceful. The neighboring houses had flower beds and seasonal decorations outside, suggesting the neighbors were normal families. Good start so far. I went to ring the doorbell and when the door opened, I was greeted by a man larger and honestly older than I had pictured. I'd pictured this regular 45-year-old dad-looking guy. Instead, it was a man maybe 60 years old, 6 feet tall, gray beard, and noticeably overweight. He greeted me with a huge smile and went in for a hug, even though we'd just met. And honestly, the warmth he radiated made me feel pretty at ease initially. He showed me around the house. It was a 2-story house. The first floor was your basic kitchen, dining room, and living room setup. Everything was dated but clean. Then the upstairs had 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. He only showed me the guest room that I'd be using and the bathroom upstairs though. The other doors stayed closed. He gestured to one and said if I ever needed to use the office across the hall, I was welcome to. Down the hall was his bedroom and another room that he didn't explain at all. I was surprised to hear there was only 1 bathroom for the whole house. That seemed inconvenient but not a deal breaker. Then there was the basement. He said it was unfinished and that he only used it for working out and doing laundry. There was a deadbolt on the outside of the basement door, which seemed weird, but he said it was there when he bought the house. That was the end of the tour. He didn't show me the backyard that day either. I told him I wanted the job and he told me I was hired. Just like that. No interview. No references. No background check. 2 days later, I came back with my stuff. I told my parents I'd gotten an apartment when they asked where I was going. I didn't explain anything more. We weren't on good terms anyway. The first night there was when I noticed the cameras. No, they weren't hidden. At least I don't think they were supposed to be. They were just small black cameras mounted up in the corners of the living room and the kitchen. It made perfectly normal sense to me at the time. He was letting basically a stranger live in his house. It wasn't that crazy that he'd want some security. Still, I wished he had mentioned it beforehand. That was the first time I felt even slightly weird about the situation. If you can't tell, I really wanted this to work out. Going back to my parents' house felt like admitting failure. That night when I went to bed, I noticed how much noisier the house felt than when we'd toured it during the day. I could hear the wood floors creaking every once in a while. At one point, I swear I heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere downstairs. I checked my phone. It was around 1:30 in the morning. Again, I came up with a reason for this in my head. When you're lying in silence trying to sleep, you pick up on more sounds than you would when occupied during the day. Plus, every old house makes sounds like that. Settling. Temperature changes. Normal stuff. The next morning, he was already gone like he said he would be. He'd left a note on the counter with a list of things he wanted done. It was normal stuff. He wanted me to do his laundry, vacuum the floors, wipe down the kitchen counters, clean the bathroom. I tried to focus on the fact that I wasn't standing behind a vape counter all day anymore. I did his laundry first in the basement. The basement was unfinished like he'd said, just concrete floors, exposed beams, a washer and dryer in the corner, and some old exercise equipment. Then I cleaned the floors and wiped everything down upstairs. After that, I went back upstairs and started setting up my bedroom more like my own space. I unpacked my clothes, set up my laptop on a small desk, and put a few personal things around just to make it feel less temporary. I remember thinking, maybe this could actually work out. I was actually being positive for once. After I finished everything, I just relaxed for a while and watched YouTube videos on my laptop. Not hearing my parents yelling downstairs or having one of them burst through my bedroom door barking orders at me was a breath of fresh air. The first week actually went pretty normal. At night when he got home, we would talk a little. Just basic stuff. It never really got deep. He asked about where I grew up, what I wanted to do eventually, if I had any hobbies. I kept my answers short. I cooked dinner a few nights in a row, nothing fancy, just pasta or chicken and rice, and he seemed to appreciate it. I started thinking maybe I just overreacted about the cameras and the weird feeling. But it didn't all stay happy and peaceful. If you've ever ignored red flags because you wanted something to work out, a job, a relationship, a living situation, you'll understand what happens next. Because sometimes those red flags are there for a reason. Drop a comment if you've ever been in a situation where you knew something was off but convinced yourself it was fine. One night, I made pasta with chicken and some vegetables. I tried my best, but I'm not some housewife-type star chef. I was a young angsty goth girl who could barely cook ramen without burning it. When he got home, he looked tired and irritated. Different from his usual friendly demeanor. He took one bite of the pasta and his whole face changed. He said it tasted bland. Completely flavorless. I said sorry and offered to add some seasoning or make something else, but he just kind of snapped. He said something like, "If you're going to be living here for free, the least you could do is learn how to cook something edible." He pushed the plate away and stood up abruptly. Then he told me to clean up the mess I'd made in his kitchen before he walked away toward his bedroom. The door slammed. It caught me completely off guard. It wasn't even just what he said. It was how fast his personality seemed to change. He'd seemed so easygoing before that. Friendly. Understanding. I cleaned everything up quietly and hoped that he just had a bad day. Everyone has bad days, right? The next morning, I actually apologized to him even though I didn't really think I'd done anything wrong. But I wanted to keep things smooth. I told him I was sorry about dinner and I'd try harder. He just laughed like it was nothing. Like the night before hadn't even happened. Then he said something that made everything weird. He said, "Maybe you could make it up to me by cleaning the house in your underwear today." He said it with a smile, like it was supposed to be funny. A joke. I remember just kind of freezing for a second because I didn't know how to respond. I told him I wasn't comfortable with that. To put it lightly. He just laughed again and said he was joking. He told me to relax. Then he left for work. I remember standing there after he left feeling really unsettled. It was the first time I really thought maybe there was something off about him beyond just being moody sometimes. That was the first time I texted one of my close friends about what was going on. I told her about the living situation and what he'd said. She immediately told me I was insane for staying there. She told me to leave as soon as possible. I didn't want to though. As weird as it was getting, I still felt like I had more control over my life there than I did living with my parents. Going back there felt like failing. Again. The next Monday, I was leaving the house to go buy groceries with some money he'd left for me on the counter. As I was driving down the street, a car behind me started laying on the horn. Aggressive, continuous honking. I thought I'd done something wrong driving, maybe I'd cut someone off without realizing it, but the car kept following me. I pulled over into a gas station parking lot because I was getting scared that something was actually wrong. Maybe my brake lights were out or something. The car pulled up right behind me and a girl got out. She looked around my age, maybe mid-20s. She walked up to my window and knocked. I rolled it down slightly. She asked if I was living at that house. The one I just pulled out of. When I said yes, she immediately told me I needed to stay away from that man. My stomach dropped. Apparently, Jackson wasn't even his real name. She said she was the girl who'd had the same arrangement before me. She told me she'd eventually realized he had cameras watching her constantly. Not just the ones in the kitchen and living room. Cameras in her bedroom too. Hidden ones. She said she started noticing he knew things he shouldn't know. Like what time she went to bed. What she wore to sleep. Things she'd said on the phone to friends when she thought she was alone. She said when she tried to leave, he made it very difficult. Kept asking questions about where she was going and when she was coming back. Made her feel guilty. Then she told me the worst part. She said one night she woke up and saw him leaving her bedroom. Just standing there in the doorway, silhouetted by the hallway light, before quietly closing the door. That part made me physically sick. Then she told me something even worse. She said he didn't even have a job. He'd lied about going to work every day. She eventually realized he was still somewhere inside the house most days. Maybe in one of those rooms he kept locked. Maybe in the basement. She didn't know. But he was watching. All the time. I just sat there in my car trying to process it. Every little weird thing suddenly started making sense. The nighttime sounds. The cameras. The way he seemed to know exactly when I'd be home. The locked rooms. I asked her how I could leave without causing problems. She told me to act completely normal. To start slowly taking important things out of my room so he wouldn't notice. Documents, valuables, anything I couldn't replace. She said when I finally left, I should make it look like I was just running errands. Take one bag. Act casual. And she told me not to confront him. Not to let him know I knew anything. After she left, I just sat in my car for a few minutes trying to calm down before going back to the house. When I walked back inside, it felt completely different. Like the walls were watching me. I felt like I was being observed even more than before. If this story is making you uncomfortable, good. It should. These situations happen more often than you think. If you're finding this story disturbing but can't stop watching, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what happens next is even worse. And trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. That night, I checked my room carefully like she'd suggested. She was right. After a few minutes of looking around, I noticed something small on the top shelf of my closet. It was pushed back into the corner behind some boxes. When I moved one of the boxes slightly, I saw it. A tiny black lens pointing outward through a small drilled hole in the wood. I just slowly put the box back like I hadn't seen anything. Needless to say, I didn't sleep at all that night. I laid there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. Wondering how many times he'd watched me change clothes. Watched me sleep. And honestly, I'm glad I didn't fall asleep that night. Because at some random hour, maybe 3 o'clock or 4 a.m., I heard my door creak open. I was facing away from the door, toward the wall. I flipped to my side and looked. It was Jackson. Standing in my doorway. Just standing there in the dark, looking at me. He noticed me looking at him. Our eyes met. He apologized for waking me. Said he thought he heard a noise and was checking to make sure everything was okay. Then he closed the door. What the actual fuck was that creep planning to do? I needed to get out of there. Immediately. The next morning, I started my plan. Every day when he left for work, I would bring one small bag of stuff to my car. Just normal things. Nothing obvious. Clothes. Toiletries. My laptop. Important documents. 3 days later, I left while he was supposedly at work. I just walked out with one final bag like I was going to the grocery store. And I never came back. Though if what that girl told me was true, who knows where he actually was. Maybe he was in the house somewhere. In one of those locked rooms. Watching me leave on a hidden camera. He texted me later that day asking where I was. I told him I decided to move back home and thanked him for the opportunity. He kept texting. Asking why. Saying I should at least come talk to him in person. Saying we could work out whatever the problem was. I never responded again. I blocked his number. About a week later, I noticed something that still bothers me to this day. I got an email notification saying someone had tried to log into one of my old email accounts. The login attempt was from the same town his house was in. Then I got another notification. Someone tried to log into my Instagram. I changed every password I had after that. Every single one. I don't know what his real intentions were, and honestly I don't want to know. Nothing technically happened to me. I left before it could. But I really believe if I'd stayed longer, something eventually would have. If you ever see deals like that offering free housing from strangers online, just remember, nothing like that is ever really free. There's always a cost. You just don't know what it is until it's too late. That story still gives me chills. But at least she got out before anything happened. The next story involves someone who wasn't so lucky. Someone who let a stranger into their home repeatedly. And that stranger had been making copies of their keys. Keep watching, because this one will make you check every lock in your house tonight. Story 2, the house cleaner. I hired her sometime around the beginning of last fall. I'm 34, I work long hours as an engineer, and I live alone in a 2-floor house I bought a couple years ago after my divorce. It's pretty small, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and yet still more space than I really need for just me. I started realizing I was falling behind on keeping it clean. Dishes would pile up. Laundry would sit in the dryer for days. Dust would accumulate on every surface. I kept telling myself I'd get to it, but I never seemed to find the time or energy. One night after work, I was scrolling through Craigslist and saw a listing for house cleaning. It was just a simple post, independent cleaner. Cash only. Flexible schedule. References available upon request. I figured why not? Maybe this was what I needed. I emailed the contact and she responded the next morning. Her name was Maria, at least that's what she said. She said she usually did apartments but was fine doing houses too. We agreed on a rate, $80 for a deep clean, and set a day she could come by while I was at work. She asked a few normal questions. How big the house was. If there were pets. If I had any cleaning products she should use or avoid. I told her no pets, relatively small house, and I had basic cleaning supplies under the kitchen sink. Looking back, I wish I hadn't mentioned the next part so casually. I told her I lived alone. She came the following Thursday. I met her quickly before leaving for work. I wanted to see who I was letting into my house, obviously. And yes, before you ask, I hid anything of value in my bedroom closet and locked the door before leaving. She looked to be maybe late 30s. She seemed very quiet. She didn't make much eye contact, but I just figured she was shy or maybe not great with English. I showed her around quickly, all the rooms I wanted her to clean upstairs and downstairs. I told her she didn't need to worry about my bedroom since I kept that door locked anyway. She asked where I kept the cleaning supplies and I showed her the cabinet under the sink. She asked if she could come regularly, maybe every couple weeks. I said maybe. I wanted to see how this first time went. Before I left, she asked what time I usually got home from work. I told her around 6 p.m., sometimes closer to 7 o'clock depending on traffic. At the time, that didn't seem weird. She probably just didn't want to still be there when I got home. Didn't want it to be awkward. When I got home that night, the place honestly looked great. The floors were mopped and shiny. The counters were spotless. Everything smelled like cleaning products and lemon. I paid her the $80 we'd agreed on and she left without much conversation. Nothing seemed wrong. For about a week, everything was good. The house stayed cleaner than it had been in months. Then things started maybe 6 or 7 nights later. I woke up around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not a great sleeper since the divorce, so waking up in the middle of the night wasn't unusual. What was unusual was I thought I heard a soft thump from downstairs. It sounded like maybe something settling or one of those random house noises you hear at night when everything's quiet. I ignored it like most people do when they hear these sounds. Probably just the house settling. Old pipes. The heater kicking on. A couple nights later, I woke up again. This time I heard what sounded like a cabinet door closing. Again, I assumed I was half asleep and imagining things. I didn't go check. I definitely wasn't going to walk around a dark house at 3 a.m. over something that was probably nothing. Looking back, I wish I had. Over the next week, I started noticing small things that felt slightly off, but not enough to really alarm me. One morning, a kitchen cabinet was open a few inches. I figured maybe I'd left it that way the night before. Another time, a chair at my dining room table was pulled out slightly. Again, I assumed I must have done it without thinking. One Saturday morning, I noticed the downstairs bathroom hand towel felt damp. Like someone had just used it. But I'd showered upstairs that morning. I hadn't been in the downstairs bathroom in days. Stuff like that kept happening. Small things that you could always explain away if you wanted to. Then the nighttime sounds kept happening. Always soft enough to dismiss. Always just barely noticeable. Once it sounded like a single slow footstep on the stairs, but I convinced myself it was probably the wood adjusting to temperature changes. I started sleeping with my bedroom door closed instead of cracked open like I usually did. I didn't really want to admit I was getting uneasy, but I was. One night, I woke up and was almost certain I heard movement right outside my bedroom door. Like pressure being shifted on the floorboards. I just stared at my door, waiting to see if the handle would move. Yes, I was getting that paranoid. But nothing happened. Eventually I fell back asleep. The next morning, I felt stupid for even being scared. I checked the house and everything looked normal. Around this time, I texted Maria again about coming back. Overall she'd done a good job and the house needed cleaning again. She came another weekday while I was at work. Same routine. I left the back door unlocked for her. When I got home, everything looked clean again. She asked if I wanted to schedule something regular, like every 2 weeks. I told her maybe once a month. Anything more seemed like a waste of money. About a week after that second cleaning, I started noticing food seemed to be disappearing slightly faster than it should. Like I could have sworn there were at least 2 more yogurt cups in the fridge the night before, and now there was only 1. Bread slices seemed lower than I remembered too. I started thinking I was losing my mind. Maybe I was eating more than I thought. Maybe I was doing things half asleep and not remembering. But one morning, I found a glass in the sink that I was almost positive I hadn't used. I lived alone. I was single. There really wasn't anyone else it could have been. At one point, I actually Googled signs of sleepwalking because I was starting to think maybe I had some kind of sleep disorder. Things really changed one night when I woke up and clearly heard slow footsteps downstairs. I know what footsteps sound like compared to house-settling noises. These were definitely steps. Deliberate. Slow. I grabbed my phone and stopped breathing to listen. After maybe 10 seconds, I heard what sounded like something lightly bumping into furniture. Like someone moving through a dark room. I didn't go downstairs. I know some people might think that sounds cowardly, but fear really does make you freeze sometimes. Or maybe I was choosing flight over fight before even confronting the situation. I just stayed in bed, sitting up, listening for another half hour. I didn't hear anything else. Eventually I convinced myself it was nothing and tried to go back to sleep. Morning came and that day I checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. I even checked the basement even though I never heard anything from down there. Nothing. A few days later, I noticed something that really bothered me. In my kitchen junk drawer, where I keep random things like batteries, takeout menus, and spare change, I also kept 2 spare house keys on a small metal ring. One of them was gone. I got actual goosebumps when I realized the obvious possibility. But I kept telling myself, no, it's not possible. You probably used it for something and forgot. I searched the whole house. I couldn't find it anywhere. The cleaner had been alone in my house twice for several hours each time. I started locking my bedroom door at night after that. Every single night without fail. Have you ever had that moment where you realize something is very wrong, but you don't want to believe it? Where your brain is trying to protect you from the truth by coming up with explanations? Comment below if you've ever experienced that feeling. Because what happens next proves that sometimes your paranoia is justified. About 4 nights later, I decided to test something. I left for work like normal in the morning. But after driving a few blocks, I circled back and parked on the next street over. I walked back quietly and let myself in through my back door as quietly as possible. I stayed upstairs in my bedroom and just waited. Listening. Around 11 o'clock in the morning, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of my front door unlocking. Not knocking. Not ringing the doorbell. The sound of a key sliding into the lock and turning. I heard very soft footsteps come inside. I moved as quietly as I could to where I could see part of the downstairs through the stair railing without being seen. It was her. Maria. The cleaner. She just walked in like she lived there. Like she owned the place. She didn't even have cleaning supplies with her. No bucket. No mop. Nothing. She went into my kitchen, opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and sat at my dining room table. She just sat there quietly for a few minutes. Drinking the water. Looking around. Then she walked slowly around my living room, looking at things. Picking up framed photos. Reading the mail I'd left on the coffee table. She picked up a photo of me and my ex-wife from before the divorce and just stared at it for what felt like forever. Then she walked toward the stairs. I backed up as quietly as I could into my bedroom and shut the door without making noise. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she'd be able to hear it. After maybe a minute, I heard her walk halfway up the stairs. Then she stopped. I could see her shadow under my door. She just stood there. Not moving. Just standing on the stairs. It felt like at least a full minute. Maybe longer. I was holding my breath, trying not to make any sound. Then I heard her walk back down the stairs slowly. I waited another few minutes before carefully opening my door and looking. She was gone. I heard the front door close. I went downstairs and checked. The front door was locked again. Like she'd never been there. But the water bottle was still on the table. Half empty. I called the police immediately. Told them everything. They came and took a report. I gave them Maria's phone number and email from our Craigslist exchange. The number was disconnected. The email bounced back. The officer asked me if I'd given anyone else a key to my house. I said no, but I told him about the missing spare key. He said, sometimes people like that don't work alone. They case houses. Make copies of keys. They know your schedule. When you leave. When you come home. They could be coming in whenever they want. That thought made me sick. I replaced every lock in my house that same day. Not just rekeyed them. Completely new locks. New deadbolts. Everything. I also installed cameras. Inside and outside. What still bothers me is that officer's comment. They don't work alone. Because a few weeks later, I was reviewing footage from my new cameras. And I saw something that made me almost move out of that house entirely. At 3:47 a.m., a figure approached my back door. Female. Same build as Maria. She tried her key. Obviously it didn't work anymore because I'd changed the locks. She tried it again. And again. Getting more aggressive. Then a second person appeared on camera. Male. Taller. He tried something on the doorknob. Some kind of tool. They worked on it for maybe 2 minutes before giving up and leaving. I filed another police report. They said they'd increase patrols in my neighborhood. But here's what keeps me up at night. I went back through my camera footage from the first week I had them installed, before I saw Maria that day. And I found something I'd missed. There was footage of someone standing in my backyard at 2 a.m. Just standing there. Looking at my house. It was too dark to see their face clearly. But they stood there for 11 minutes. Just watching. I never hired another cleaner again. I clean my own house now, no matter how busy I am. And I check my locks every single night before bed. All of them. Sometimes twice. Because I know she had been in my house multiple times when I was asleep upstairs. And I'll never know for sure what she was doing down there in the dark. If this story made you check your own locks, you're not alone. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because the final story is even more disturbing. It involves a Craigslist ad, a too good to be true deal, and a house where multiple people were waiting in the dark. Stay until the end, because this one has an ending you won't forget. Story 3, The Couch. It's crazy to think that 2008 was almost 20 years ago, but here we are. For anybody who's too young to remember, the early 2000s were like the Wild West for the internet in many ways. Back in 2008, I was in my early 20s, and honestly I was reckless. I was way too trusting. I was the king of saying things like, that could never happen to me. I just never really had that sense of caution or anxiety that other people had. That is, until one spring evening when I experienced firsthand that downright evil individuals really do exist in the world. Facebook had just started to blow up, but most people I knew were still using MySpace. Social media was a thing, but not like today. We'd all heard horror stories about the internet, but nobody I knew actually cared. Or more accurately, we were all incredibly ignorant. I bring all this up because perhaps the most insane thing about the internet at the time was a little website called Craigslist. Now, I know Craigslist is still around, but it's nothing compared to what it was back in the early 2000s. We didn't have Facebook Marketplace or OfferUp or any of those apps. If you wanted something used, you went to Craigslist. You could find anything. Small items, furniture, cars, jobs, apartments. Everything. I had friends who used Craigslist all the time. They swore by it. Said it was the greatest website ever for finding deals. I never had any interest in visiting the site until my life started to unravel a bit in the spring of 2008. I was living with my girlfriend Amy in a small apartment. We'd been together for 3 years. And with almost no notice, she dumped me and kicked me out. Said she'd met someone else at her work and wanted me gone by the weekend. Thankfully I wasn't living on the street or anything because I had friends who let me crash on their couches. I spent the immediate days after the breakup trying to find my own apartment, but it was proving harder than I thought on my $7.50 an hour retail salary. One of my friends, the one whose couch I'd been sleeping on, told me to check Craigslist for possible rooms for rent or even shared housing situations. That was a hard pass for me. I don't know why. I just didn't love the idea of living with strangers. However, I did start looking for furniture and items to eventually fill a place whenever I found one, since Amy had kept everything after the breakup. At first, it was like a treasure chest of goods. I could finally see why people loved Craigslist. I could find literally anything I needed. Cheap coffee tables, lamps, dishes, everything. I was finding deals left and right. My buddy had a decent-sized garage that he let me store my recently purchased furniture in until I found my own place. One afternoon, I was looking for a couch. Something small that would fit in a studio or one bedroom. I found a post from a guy named Keith who was selling a sectional sofa for $45. He had a picture with the posting and it looked like it was in great shape. Slightly worn on the armrests, but overall really nice for the price. The price seemed too good to be true, but like I said, I was ignorant. I just saw a good couch and a low price tag. I messaged Keith through Craigslist and to my surprise, he messaged me back almost immediately. He said the couch was still available. He seemed friendly enough in his messages. Professional, even. He told me he'd gotten a new job in another state and was trying to sell everything before he moved. That's why the price was so low, he just needed it gone. The reason seemed good enough to me, so we exchanged numbers and set up a time to meet that evening. A meetup that would go on to traumatize me for years and open my eyes to the horror that exists even in our own neighborhoods. I pulled up to the house around 9 p.m. that night. Probably a red flag for most people, but not for me at the time. He'd said he had to work late and couldn't meet until after his shift. It didn't seem weird to me. Lots of people work evening shifts. The house was dark. And not just because it was nighttime outside. Everything about it looked desolate. Run down. It was on a very old street with almost no street lamps. Maybe 1 or 2 working lights for the entire block. There were several houses around, and they were all just as dark and run down as Keith's place. Like the whole street had been forgotten. I tried calling Keith several times with the number he'd given me, but I kept getting one of those automated messages, "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." Just as I was about to drive away, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a different number. Different area code entirely. "Hey, it's Keith. My phone broke earlier today. This is my work phone. Pull around back and I'll meet you at the back door." I was definitely a little weirded out, but more annoyed than scared. I realize hindsight is 20/20, but when you're actually in these situations, your brain works differently. You're not thinking about worst-case scenarios. You're thinking about that $45 couch. I drove around to the back of the house like he'd asked. And I couldn't believe it was even darker back there. I figured this guy would turn on some kind of porch light or something. I got to the back door and just stood there for a moment. I didn't know if he wanted me to knock or if he was coming outside or what. I decided to call the new number he'd texted from. Instead of hearing the ring in my ear, I heard a generic ringtone coming from behind me. Not from inside the house. From the bushes in the backyard. I hate to even say this, but this is the first time I finally felt some kind of alarm that something might not be right. Keith came running out from the bushes, waving his flip phone in the air. With that strange voice, high-pitched and almost frantic, he told me he'd been throwing away some old food scraps back there. Said he was feeding the raccoons and possums that lived in those bushes. He said he didn't mean to alarm me. I told him it was fine and that I just wanted to see the couch so I could be on my way. In an overly cheerful voice, he said, "Of course. Of course." He walked, almost skipped, past me toward the back door. When he got there, it looked like he was struggling to open it. Jiggling the handle, pushing his shoulder against it. When he told me to meet him at the back, I'd assumed he was going to open it from inside the house. I didn't expect him to be trying to unlock it from outside. This was the first time I got a good look at Keith under the dim backyard light. He was older than I'd expected. Maybe late 50s. Really skinny. Almost skeletal. He had long white hair pulled back in a greasy ponytail. And he smelled terrible. Like cigarettes and body odor and something else I couldn't place. He pulled away from the door and looked at me. He asked if I could help him get the door open. Said sometimes it stuck and he was embarrassed he couldn't get it. He told me to use my shoulder and push the door as hard as I could. At this point, every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. But I was already there. Already committed to the situation. I grabbed the doorknob and lowered my shoulder into the door. It didn't stick at all. In fact, as I lowered my shoulder to push, someone from the other side opened the door. I had so much momentum that I lost my balance and fell forward into the dark house. When I hit the floor inside, I heard Keith yell one word. Now. In the dark room, two other people emerged from each side and grabbed me. Held me down on the floor. I started to struggle, but it didn't matter. One of the guys holding me was huge. Massive. Keith started kicking my face. My ribs. Anywhere he could reach. This is the moment where everything goes wrong. Where a simple Craigslist deal turns into something much darker. If you're still watching, drop a comment. Because what happens next is the only reason I'm alive to tell this story. One of the worst parts of all this was the sheer darkness. I couldn't see anything clearly. Just shadows. Just shapes moving above me. That made everything feel so much worse. I could feel my body starting to get weak from Keith kicking me repeatedly. He told one of the others to grab the tape. I heard the sound of duct tape being pulled from a roll. I couldn't even imagine what they were planning to do. Were they going to rob me? Kidnap me? Kill me? What happened next is probably the closest thing to a miracle that's ever happened to me. During the struggle, me falling, them grabbing me, the chaos, my phone had fallen out of my pocket. And somehow, in all of that, I'd accidentally called my friend Derek. The friend whose couch I'd been staying on. The sounds of Derek yelling hello? Hello? Were coming through my phone speaker loud and clear in the quiet house. I made a split-second decision. I yelled at the top of my lungs, I'm in the back of the house. Come help me. They're trying to kill me. It was a complete bluff. Derek had no idea where I was. He was probably sitting at home 30 minutes away. But I was hoping, praying, it would scare these guys into thinking I wasn't alone. That I had backup coming. The big guy eased his grip slightly and looked at Keith. Keith had stopped kicking for a brief second. That second was all I needed. I was able to free one arm and push the smaller guy off me. Then I scrambled to my feet and ran for the back door. I could hear them chasing me. Footsteps pounding behind me. Someone yelling. But I didn't look back. I just ran. I made it to my car, jumped in, and locked the doors immediately. Just as I was starting the engine, I saw the big guy clearly for the first time under my headlights. He was bald with a patchy beard. But his eyes were the worst part. They were completely dark. Lifeless. Empty. He was trying to open my car door even as I was throwing it in reverse. Pulling on the handle. Pounding on the window. I just kept driving. Backwards at first, then forward. I didn't care about hitting anything. I just needed to get away. I drove for hours before I went back to Derek's place. I was scared that somehow those guys were going to follow me. That they'd see where I was staying. When I finally got back to Derek's house, I was shaking. Covered in bruises. Blood on my face from where Keith had kicked me. I called Derek and told him everything. He couldn't believe it. I eventually called the police, but it was too late. The Craigslist post was gone. Deleted. The phone number Keith had texted from was some kind of prepaid burner phone. Untraceable. I gave them the best description I could of all three men and the address of the house. They said they'd investigate. I never heard back about what they found. If anything. As far as I know, Keith and those two other guys are still out there. Still posting ads on Craigslist or other sites. Still luring people to that dark house. What scares me every time I think about that night is their intention. This wasn't just a robbery. Keith had lured me there with a $45 couch, something basically worthless. Whatever these monsters wanted, it wasn't money. It was so much worse. I think about what would have happened if Derek hadn't accidentally answered that call. If they'd gotten that tape on me. I think about that dark house and those empty rooms and what they might have done. And I'm just thankful I escaped before finding out. If you made it to the end of these 3 stories, thank you for watching. These are real experiences from real people. Craigslist isn't what it used to be, but dangers like this still exist on every platform where strangers can connect. If you've had your own Craigslist horror story, share it in the comments. And if this video made you think twice about meeting strangers from the internet, good. That's the point. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more true horror stories. Stay safe out there, everyone. And remember, if a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is. Because sometimes the price isn't money. Sometimes the price is you.